on peer-to-peer fundraising. My name is Kiara Frechette. I'm the Nonprofit Programs Director here at Spur Local. If you did not mean to join our peer-to-peer fundraising breakout, feel free to private message Sarah on our team. She will be our tech support, and she's happy to make sure that you get to the right session that you are intending to go to. But with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So as we think about today's world, the world we fundraise in really has fundamentally shifted. Our supporters are hyper connected. They do as well as we live inside digital echo chambers in some way, shape, or capacity. And like us, they also receive an influx of messages vying for their attention. So these shifts have made it a little bit more challenging to cultivate those donor relationships, to reach new donors. So what we've seen it really is that peer-to-peer fundraising has become even more important during this time as an acquisition and engagement tool. So in this session in particular, I'm going to be going through what is peer-to-peer fundraising, setting some context for the why behind it, getting into what exactly it is, and then discussing how to leverage your own network to activate new supporters. So we'll start out here just with some general trends, just some context setting for where we are currently in the world and in the development sphere. So as we think about engaging donors in 2024, you may have seen this slide if you've attended any of Matt's webinars on data in the development space for the year, but we really know that connections are key. Narrative storytelling really is the most engaging way to show authenticity. We're seeing more and more that organizations are really using that ability to storytell, share impact from either that first person perspective, be able to visually storytell has been really, really important. We've also seen that foundation giving is down. So there's been flat funding decreasing in real dollars, individual giving has decreased. So as we think about this space of what the giving sphere, the giving atmosphere ecosystem is really looking like, peer-to-peer can really help leverage, it's a transference of trust. It's huge in giving, and this really allows for it. As we think about peer-to-peer giving, it's a way that folks can relate to each other within their own networks to engage individuals. So we're seeing this really come out as a top form of fundraising because we're seeing a little bit going down. People are wanting those connections. They're wanting those stories. And being able to leverage individuals who have those stories themselves, who can tell about impact, can be really important and really allow for us to be able to build those deeper connections and allow for our network to tell our story in the way that they've been impacted, in the way that they've been involved in our network. We also see just generally, the other thing I'll mention here is that virtual engagement is high across multiple platforms, and peer-to-peer really allows for us to be able to digitally cultivate communities because we have folks who are engaging with us maybe in person, they're going online, if they're posting about our organization, if they are getting their friends, their family, their networks to be giving, this is a great way to be doing so and leveraging that digital space where we know so many people are spending time, think of ourselves, how much time do we spend online? Our audiences are doing the same. So how are we making sure that those folks who are most engaged with our organizations are those that are also able to share and be able to bring other people into our atmosphere? Another kind of context setting slide here for where we are and kind of why peer-to-peer is so important and can be so important is a CosVox giving study. So what this shares here, and you'll see on the slide, are just the dynamics of today's donor preferences. So what we're seeing here is that more donors want to donate, but less do. So when we're looking at those younger donors, so that's folks who are aged 18 to 34, 50% considered increasing their donations. So if we have, that 50% that want to donate more, but they aren't, how are we reaching those folks? And the way that I will suggest today is really through peer-to-peer fundraising. How are we making sure that those who are engaged are reaching them, their networks and their peers, usually similar age, or they have a shared characteristic that we can really leverage there. Again, to the storytelling piece, storytelling is that #1 way to get donations. So regular updates, testimonials, visuals of impact are really the most effective in fundraising. And as we think about peer-to-peer, we're really telling stories. We're telling our friends, we're telling our networks, our professional colleagues, why we were impacted, why we believe in the mission of an organization, and why they should too. So we're telling those stories. So being able to leverage the most effective way of fundraising is always, a positive thing there. And then finally, donors are eager to be more active. 71% of donors express willingness to assist in fundraising activities. So if we have that 71% that are interested, they're already giving their dollars, maybe they're interested or willing to give their time, how can we leverage that and be able to prep them and support them in reaching their friends, their networks, their families, their communities, and bringing in additional dollars. They're already doing it. They're already bought in. They're already invested in our mission. And if they're interested in, and they have that willingness, let's use that. Let's make sure that 71% we're reaching and having something for them to do for our organization. And really what we see here as we're thinking about, again, current atmosphere, setting the context for why for peer-to-peer fundraising, we know that people won't donate or donate as much without trusting you. So as nonprofit fundraisers, as folks in the nonprofit space, we need to go beyond just saying that we do good work. And so what this looks like, unfortunately, 48% of people don't trust nonprofits. And that's because of that overhead myth. Public often wants nonprofits to have minimal internal investment. And 2 out of 5 people think nonprofits mismanage their money. So knowing that these are kind of what's working, unfortunately, against us, how are we thinking about creating that trust and building on trust that already exists within those in our network who know we're doing really great work, who know that we need that overhead to be able to invest in our staff, as we've talked about in the different sessions today, who know that we need to be able to invest in our operations so that we can spend time cultivating donors, so we can spend time doing hosting our programs that are the reason we exist. And so we're thinking about this. This is kind of this is the reality that exists, and thinking about trust being that currency, the way that we are building connections, knowing that there are folks who ultimately donate to us because they trust us as an organization or have some level of trust in us. We're able to use that trust and kind of use the transference of trust. They trust us. They're going to talk with their folks, who in turn, if they're friends, they know them, they likely trust them in some capacity. How can we, again, leverage that? So with this, I will just go ahead and pause here and talk about what is peer-to-peer. I've mentioned it a couple times, depending on how your experience has been with development and fundraising. You may be familiar with peer-to-peer. You may have run a peer-to-peer campaign, or this might be something new to you. So peer-to-peer is really relational fundraising. So this is led by individuals who care about your work and your impact, and they're folks who will champion your cause to others they know, and they'll really leverage their networks to gain new supporters. So really how peer-to-peer fundraising works is that you have a couple ambassadors for your organization, people who take on the role of fundraisers, and they're hosting those campaigns or kind of subsidiaries of those campaigns to raise money in their networks. You may know this very familiarly, and I'll go through some examples in just in the next slide, but you may have seen people post, they're running a 5K for a specific cause, and they're raising money to do so. That would be considered a peer-to-peer campaign. Or if someone's raising money on Giving Tuesday on behalf, maybe they're a board member and they're raising money on behalf of an organization and they're sharing their story. That would also be peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer could also be seen as a business, having a QR code on a certain week. Maybe their organization is, a mental health focused organization, or they're a business related to therapy. Maybe they're raising money for a mental health related nonprofit. That could also be peer-to-peer. So having another group raise money on your behalf, sharing out about your mission because they believe in your impact and mission. And why this really works, I know I started to mention this, really, is that transference of trust. And that's really key here. New supporters that come to your organization may not know you or trust you, but they do trust to some degree, of course, their personal connections, the folks that they know, the ones that they're interacting with, either in that personal, professional, or other associated way. And this is really especially important as we think about small organizations, you all here today, that may sometimes lack some name recognition in the space. You have that dedicated group of supporters, you have that dedicated group of board members. Maybe you feel like you've exhausted that network of board members, networks, or peers. But being able to leverage those networks and to explore new networks to create that trust and to leverage that trust is really key. As we think about this, another thing as we think about peer-to-peer, this really can be varied, and you'll see on the next slide, I'll share some examples of peer-to-peer campaigns. But they don't, one of the kind of myths is that peer-to-peer only is social media, or it's only for younger supporters who are active online. Doesn't have to be on social media or reserved solely for younger supporters. Really, anyone can do peer-to-peer. And peer-to-peer can be done over email. It can be done over text, some text to give platforms, could be folks calling folks in their network. And of course, the most popular that we do see is the use of social media. So people posting on Facebook or on LinkedIn, or running it through a peer giving site, which we'll share some examples of in coming slides. But it really can be done by in different contexts, especially as we think about, as I get into how to prep people for doing a peer-to-peer campaign, how to leverage your network and your existing network. You'll want to think about how will they best reach their peers. If you have maybe an older audience and folks really use email often, how can you make sure that they have those templates to be able to do this effectively over email? Or, if you feel like your organization's really great at a texting campaign, how can you make sure that people are supported via text, that they have those templates and tools to be able to reach their group of friends and network? But ultimately, peer-to-peer is relational fundraising. And so some examples I know I just mentioned here, there's a couple of different ways that this could look, right? So one of the ones we're most familiar with and kind of one of the earliest examples we've seen of this are those runs, walks, or challenges. So we've seen folks, doing a 5K walk, maybe for breast cancer or a specific illness. We see that pretty popular. Cycling challenges, bowl-a-thons, where you're raising a certain amount of money to be able to participate in that activity. And usually it's that one person who's been affected, or they know someone who's been affected by or impacted by an organization. They're sharing with their network. They want to participate, and to do so, they need to raise money. Another way is an event. So those are, annual galas, program campaigns, capital campaigns, maybe giving days. So this is where we're really asking our network either to invite people and kind of come to these events that are focused on fundraising, or to give on a certain day. So if you are an organization and maybe there's an awareness month for something that your organization is really focused on, maybe what you're asking is your network on that day to leverage their networks and get people to give on that day. So an example of this is Earth Day we just had. And so environmental organizations, we saw a couple really leveraging that, and they're sharing, okay, on Earth Day, or in preparation for Earth Day, we're challenging our network to raise X amount of money through their network. Or we're giving our supporters, our donors, ways to be sharing about our organization on Earth Day when it's most relevant, when our organization really is top of mind for folks. So thinking about it not only as those activities, but ways to be thinking about are there certain days in the year, are there certain events that we are hosting that are really ripe for inviting others and getting our network to invite others and get them engaged in our work. And then finally, sometimes we see these DIY fundraising. Sometimes we see these on Facebook and other places, but primarily Facebook, or, as people are celebrating life events, they're raising money for a specific cause. So sometimes we see, that birthday campaign on Facebook, they're raising money on behalf of XYZ organization, and then people can do that in lieu of a gift. We've also seen, people going to weddings, instead of getting a gift on a registry for those people who are getting married, they're asking people to donate to a specific cause. And likewise, also see that in memorial of somebody who's passed. So as you're thinking about this, it's not only kind of that traditional way we're thinking, maybe Giving Tuesday, where everyone is giving on that day, or for a specific event participation, but also could be seen in ways of what times during the year can people be asking their network, giving our network those ideas, the people in our network, starting to percolate, give them some ideas to go off of, brainstorming with them. And then also always making sure that people have those resources. So, when my birthday comes along, I have what I need to be able to share more about the organizations that mean most to me. And I'll share here just a couple examples of how this sometimes looks, because as we're thinking about, an example here is events, campaigns. One of the ones that we do see a lot of peer-to-peer happening around is Giving Tuesday. So I'll just share what this could look like if you were to use a platform to do so, because sometimes I feel like this can be helpful here. This is an example of peer-to-peer giving. This is from our Giving Tuesday website that we do with CauseVox here. As you can see on the slide, what this looks like is an organization is featured. They have a page within a larger campaign, and then people have that option, right, to create a fundraiser. So they're able to then go ahead and create their own fundraiser that is tied to that larger fundraiser. So if you, for example, if you're not doing Giving Tuesday, that's the example here, but maybe you're doing a capital campaign to raise money to create new office space or a new site for your programming. You could have a larger capital campaign page then you can have an option for folks to create that fundraiser on behalf of you. So if Sarah is one of our supporters and we are raising money for a new space, she could then create a new fundraiser, and then now she can share out that page and raise money for set her own goal and go ahead and raise money, and all that money will be directed back to our organization. So now Sarah has her own fundraiser that she's running, that she's posting about, and it's tied back to our larger goal, and people can always see the larger organization and larger goal, but they're also connecting directly with Sarah, connecting directly to Sarah's fundraiser. And you'll see that here kind of as we look at another example. Hope Connections is one of our partner nonprofits. And you can see here that someone, Amy, was able to create a team for this. So Team Amy for Hope Connections. So this was what it could look like, if you are using a platform to do that peer-to-peer campaign, that somebody could build a campaign off of your main campaign, still be tied to you, but then also have that opportunity to have that personal connection. People can typically write in their personal impact stories, share why they're sharing about this campaign, why they're asking folks to give, and then be able to be, again, as a friend of Sarah, if we're using Sarah as an example again, as a friend of Sarah, I see Sarah's posting about this. I can click in and see exactly why Sarah is asking me, her friend, to be giving money to this organization, and from there can learn a little bit more. And this also allows, if you do have a larger platform where people can create those sub kind of campaigns, always helpful too, because folks then can go back to that larger campaign, learn more about the organization, and then be able to give on their own. Also just see, what is the organization hoping to do? So not only am I hearing from Sarah about what Sarah's personal connection is, but then I'm also looking and seeing, what does that organization really prioritize outside of this? Is there anything else they do that maybe I'll connect with a little bit more directly? So I've started to make the case here for why peer-to-peer, and that's why we're talking today, but really it's to leverage those relationships. People give to people they trust. It allows us to transfer that trust, and also allows us to expand our donor base and build that larger organizational trust, because once people are in our sphere, we are able to build and cultivate that relationship. It's also a great way for more engaged supporters to step up. Again, that 71% of folks say that they are interested and willing to be able to fund, or willing to fundraise on, participate in fundraising activities. So as we're thinking about this also builds their own engagement. If they are putting themselves out there as a supporter of the organization, likely they're having more conversations, they're advocating for our organization. And so we're able to give our engaged supporters something to do, something to talk about us, because they're really engaged with us, builds that deeper support and allows them to really build early engagement from those in their network. It's also just generally, we see, again, the best way to get donors currently, it's really that structured word of mouth opportunity. And especially kind of in a transition out of the pandemic, thinking about, how do we get word of mouth digitally? How are we getting it out about our organization where we may not be showing up physically at events? This can really be that opportune way to get those grassroots donors engaged in our organizations. So next, I want to transition a little bit and just talk about, so I've made the case for peer-to-peer, telling you why it kind of matters and why it's important, why we see it really increasing and really being the newest and kind of most effective way of giving, at least in recent years. The next thing I want to transfer and kind of start talking about is some tips. So if you are running that peer-to-peer campaign, what can you do to be successful? And I will also note, I'll pause here for just a second and make this announcement. If you have any questions for me around peer-to-peer or for each other, feel free at any point to go ahead and pop that into the chat. We'll have some time at the end where I can answer any questions that come through. So as I'm talking, if you have either an example or a question that you want to share, feel free to go ahead and put it in there. So our first tip here is, so as we're thinking about this, we're planning the actual campaign. So we want to think through what that call to action and timing looks like. So first of all, we should know, why are we peer-to-peer fundraising? Do we have a campaign in mind? Do we have that event in mind? Do we know what this is going to be? Even, if we're thinking about our campaigns, even if the campaign is for general operating support, that's fine. But just knowing, why do we have that campaign? Is it an awareness month? Are we doing it towards, maybe we're using Giving Tuesday as an example, or we have an event coming up, the money will go towards, well, probably not an event going through general operating, but if you're thinking about this, just kind of know what behind it. Campaigns we see work best when it's targeted at a program, a specific population, or a specific effort. So maybe we're expanding our programming, maybe we're trying to reach younger donors, or we're trying to reach a specific part of our community, or we have a special effort that we're running. And so we have that campaign, it's specific, and people can rally around, okay, yes, I participate in this program and I would be excited to see it expand. And so I'm going to help raise money for that expansion effort. As you think about who, and we'll get to a worksheet in just a little bit here, but you'll want to think through who you want to lead this. Who will be your lead advocates? And these folks will really dictate who will be involved. So as you think about this, it's not necessarily just throwing it out to the ether and saying, hey, everyone, you can raise money, but really thinking about who are our most engaged donors, maybe most engaged volunteers. Can we ask them to lead our peer-to-peer? Can we make those personal asks to them to go ahead and run these campaigns? And then we'll also want to think about the when. So we'll want to create materials and goals before reaching out to everyone. Ideally, as we're planning for a peer-to-peer campaign should be launched with the leaders of the campaign 2 to 4 weeks before that campaign launches. And the main reason for this being that then that gives them time to maybe edit any templates we're giving them, allows them to set up their pages, maybe start talking word of mouth to folks in their network about that they're going to start this campaign. Really allows us to answer any questions that they have as leaders of the campaign before it launches. So you'll want to think both through the call to action, what are we asking people to do and why? And then how are we prepping for that? How are we thinking about the timing on our own part, the support we're able to give the peers that will be advocating for us, and then also timing in terms of how much time do they have to prep to ask their folks. Tip number 2 here is to identify those leaders, and this is really to find our advocates. So as we think about leaders of a peer-to-peer campaign, you'll want to think about the network that you're trying to reach. A goal of peer-to-peer campaign and the advocates that are raising money on our behalf aren't always the richest or our major donors. We want to be thinking about those that are most engaged, and that can look different for every organization. Peer-to-peer is also really great for those grassroots donors, folks who are giving at maybe a lower level, but they're pretty engaged with our organization, or they're younger to our younger donor profile at our organization. So just really thinking about, one, who makes sense in our network, but also who, knowing that folks tend to have networks of folks who are similar to them in some aspect. Do their networks make sense, and do they fit the ask? So if we're raising a ton of money for our capital campaign, for example, and we're only asking grassroots donors to be our lead advocates for a specific campaign, that may not be that fit because we're trying to raise X amount of money. Maybe it's time sensitive and we need larger dollars coming in. Grassroots donors may not make sense for that campaign. But if we're doing a peer-to-peer campaign because our goal is really just to expand the number of donors in our network, maybe grassroots really works well. So what you could do is do a little bit of light prospecting here. If you're trying to understand and you're thinking, okay, when I say engaged donor, 2 or 3 people come to mind for you. You're going to go ahead and look at maybe their social media accounts. Maybe you're thinking about their job. What are they engaged in day to day outside of engaging with your organization? Where did they go to school? Are those networks of people who are similar to who you're trying to reach and who are typically engaged in your organization? Another thing you can be thinking about network-wise is just, have they brought in people before? If they have, they've probably already done this once. They already have their spiel, their why. Let's leverage that and make sure that they're a part of this. Outside of network and just thinking about who could people bring in based on their own identity, thinking about engagement. So those are those active and consistent volunteers or donors. Maybe they're attending some of your events, or if you have advocacy options, they're advocating on behalf with your organization, and they've been in touch with you during this year. When we're asking peer-to-peer, we may be reaching out to some folks who we haven't heard from a bit, but likely those folks aren't as engaged. So if people have been in touch with you this year or kind of towards the end of last year, we're still at April here. If they've been in touch, again, great way to kind of follow up with them, talk with them, see if it makes sense, and if they'd be interested. And then finally, another way to think about finding your advocates is thinking about long-term supporters. So these are people with 2 or more years of engagement. If they are newer and to your organization, we'll just look for signs of serious engagement. Did they both give and attend an event? Do they volunteer and give at your organization? Are they volunteering at every event your organization has an opportunity to volunteer for? Really just thinking about what that looks like. So it's not to say, if you have someone who fits into all of these, their network is great, they're really engaged and they've been a long-term supporter, absolutely, you should be involving them. But this is really just meant to kind of get the ideas going and brainstorms going, because you can really think about this separately, combing your network, thinking about those who are engaged, and thinking about long-term supporters and involving them all in peer-to-peer campaigns. So our next slide here, and Sarah will go ahead and drop this in the chat, and we'll make sure that we follow this up with this, but as in the follow-up that we send out next week. But this is a worksheet just securing your lead advocates. So if you're taking this, maybe you're attending today's session on behalf of a team member, or you want to make sure your board sees this, or you want to make sure your team sees this. This is just a way to be thinking about and kind of starting to brainstorm about, who are the most engaged in your network. What is your pitch going to be to them? And then what do you ultimately want them to do, right? Are they going to be writing something? Are they going to be posting something? Are they going to be sending emails? So really just using this as a tool to start and start that planning. So as we do this, once we kind of know who we're reaching out to and why we're reaching out to them, the next tip here is just to prep folks. So just making sure that those that we're asking to fundraise on behalf of our organization to share their story, to make sure that they feel ready and confident to do so. So what we're thinking about here is, one, we're thinking about timing. So we want to give them a suggested communications calendar. So thinking about that 2 to 4 weeks, when do we hope that they'll be sharing out with their audience? And when will the campaign end? That's probably what they're going to share most often. They don't need that full day-to-day, what's going to happen each day of this campaign, but really make sure that they know when they should be asking, and then when they should be telling people to donate by. It's probably the bare minimum on that. I've mentioned templates a couple of times here, but you'll want to give examples for social posts that they may make, conversations they may have, or emails. And we're happy to share. I have a couple examples that we can share post-session of what a script could look like, but oftentimes we see people put together very short blurbs for people to even, or sample posts to put on social media, pitches to have and use in conversation, or email templates where there's space for that leader, that advocate, to go ahead and write in their own personal impact. So it's coming from something that they've been able to share and been able to edit. You also want to think about visuals. Is there space for them to share any photos or videos? If you don't have that doesn't make sense for the type of organization you are, maybe their own interaction, you don't need visuals. But if there is an icon you're using for a campaign or a video that you want them to be sharing, make sure that they have that kind of prepped in that nice, neat package. Maybe you're putting that in a shareable Google Drive folder or Dropbox folder that you're then sharing with them. And then as you're thinking about this, you'll want to make sure that you both set up time for yourself to check in with them, and then making sure that they have your contact information. So as they're doing this, as they're running their own peer campaign, they should know how they can reach you, and know when you'll be checking in with them to see if they need more support. So oftentimes when we're thinking about, I'll use the example of Giving Tuesday, if we have folks kind of fundraising before the actual Tuesday of Giving Tuesday, we may be checking in with them. Hey, here are the templates, 1 week out, 2 days out. What do you need? What can we do to support you, and making sure that you're successful? So checking in with those folks. And then finally, as we're thinking about prep, as much as possible, though we know obviously capacity is limited, just giving at least 2 options for each of the methods. So as we're thinking about different templates here, if you have emails, giving maybe 2 example emails that they could send, something so it feels a little bit more personal. They feel like they have an ability to choose, and you're also able to kind of direct and tailor the communications. Maybe you're giving them both a social post or an email, or a social post and an email draft language and a conversation starter. So being able to give people options. So again, depending on the relationships they have with people, they can kind of lean on one way or another, and have a little bit more autonomy around that. Another thing to think about as we think about prepping, the different tips around peer-to-peer really are around connections. So as we're thinking about this, just encourage you to have your network think about their own connections. So as you're prepping people, as you're thinking about what that looks like as they are advocating for your organization, having them think about their personal networks. So that's typically as friends and family. Or connections through institutions that they're a part of. Maybe they are a part of a church or another volunteer group. Who are with their personal connections? Tend to be those personal connections tend to be local, though not always, but you'll want to start with those who care about the issue most. So encouraging them to think, okay, about their friends and family and who to reach out to in that way. Another way to encourage folks to think about their own networks are their professional networks. So these could be colleagues, former colleagues, professional associations that they may be part of, professional groups. If they're in a physical office space, is there an option for them to display something? Maybe if they have cubicles, though I hope not, but if they do, they can post something on their bulletin board that they have in their office about the campaign or your organization. Maybe there's a QR code attached to that. Just making that ask simple, straightforward. It doesn't need to be filled with too much, but really the why behind it and why they're asking for you to support this organization monetarily, and they might have to just a little bit about your organization. And then finally, as we think about these connections, encouraging people in your network to be thinking both about those personal and professional connections, ultimately giving them a couple, like I was just mentioning, giving them a couple templates to use. So maybe if you decided email is the best way for your network to leverage their personal connections, maybe you're giving them one email that they should be using for their friends and family, and then one email to be using with their professional network, the one that they'll be emailing out to their coworkers. You may also think about this in terms of a social post. You're creating language and templates for a post that maybe they're putting on Facebook or Instagram, and then you're also making a post that they could be posting on LinkedIn. So just giving them both options and then options to customize. And then as much as possible, if you're able to share success stories, if you have done peer-to-peer in the past, maybe you have a couple standouts, just sharing what really worked for those folks so that they, when people are getting excited, thinking about what they're doing for the organization, also able to leverage past success and then past ways that people have engaged their networks. Tip number 5 here is to gamify. So thinking about the fun and the competition that can come with peer-to-peer. And this may not make sense for your organization, the folks that you're using as your lead advocates, but could be an option. So maybe you've done peer-to-peer in the past and you feel like it hasn't been as successful as you'd hoped. Maybe you might want to try gamifying it and making it that friendly competition. We also see that this sometimes works if you have a couple people in a peer group who are all peer fundraising for you, that they're now competing within that group to be able to raise the most money for your organization. Another example of that could be, you have a group of dedicated volunteers. Around Giving Tuesday, you're running a competition for that. Couple ways to think about gamifying. One are matching donations. So matching gifts really work great for driving giving, especially those low-level gifts. If we reach $5,000 by a certain date, then $5,000 more will be donated via a specific organization that's making that match, or a specific donor, or maybe it's anonymous, but you're able to meet that match. If we have this, you just want to make sure it's time-bound, certain amount of money by XYZ date. And then just communicating it to leaders ahead of time so that they feel that they're able to encourage their network to meet that criteria by that date. You can also make it a contest, which is offering a chance to leaders to win or compete. Maybe there is a tangible prize. You're giving out something for your organization. Maybe it's some swag that you have for your organization. Maybe it's that they can get to have a individual volunteering session that they get to bring their friends to. Maybe they're thinking about an experience. If you are a performing arts organization, maybe they can come to a rehearsal, thinking about what those tangible prizes could be. Could also just be bragging rights that they have for your organization, which if they're really engaged, maybe that is enough. But just making it a contest, being able to celebrate. Maybe you're posting about them on social media, like, hey, this is the group that brought in the most dollars. We're now able to do XYZ because of this. And that really gets to that shout out point here you'll see on slide. But just throughout the campaign, you'll want to highlight and celebrate those leaders, ultimately, they're volunteering their time, their networks, their resources to raise money for something that they really care about. So you want to thank and celebrate them often, making sure that they feel like they are part of the team that is raising money, and that and you're recognizing their time and effort that they put into raising money for your organization. And then finally, kind of with that, the shout outs, thanking, celebrating, the last tip I have here is really just around the follow-up. So as you are thinking about that continued support, ultimately, we're running peer-to-peer maybe once a year, we're running that campaign, we'll want to run it the next year too. And we don't want to exhaust and take advantage of anyone in our network and only have them do it once. We really want this to be something that maybe their peers are aware that they do year to year. So as we think about this, it's important that we have that continued support. We continue to build that relationship with our peer leaders. So as we think about this, for leaders, you'll want to thank them for any personal contribution, plus any efforts that they have to engage others. Even if they aren't successful and they don't necessarily hit that giving goal that they've set for themselves, you'll want to thank them because they did put time into this. They did, work on that pitch. They're posting about it, and they're probably talking to their networks about it. And then you also probably want to give them some sample language to support their contributors. So your focus is their leaders in the organization and something that they can now thank or send their contributors to their campaign to be able to thank them and engage them. As you think about the donors, the people who gave through that, usually you can see that if you're using a specific software, but you can certainly thank them directly, even if leaders are thinking too. And we'd certainly encourage this. So if people are thinking, Sarah's running that campaign, Sarah's friend goes ahead and donates, we're thanking not only Sarah, but we're also thanking that friend directly, even though they gave through Sarah. So we're getting that two-pronged thank you. And we're focusing really on that great impact of collective giving and letting them know that we see them as a donor, we see them as a part of our network now, and we're excited to have them here. As you think about this, it can be really personal. Keep it short. It's their first interaction with you. They may not fully be aware of exactly what you do. They've donated to their friends sometimes and not always thinking about that larger goal. We want them to know about us, but keeping it personal and short, giving them time to be able to get engaged with our organization and providing them with some follow-up actions, always certainly helpful there. And then as you think about this, you'll want to have a plan prior to the campaign just about how that peer leader will give your donor contact info if willing and needed. So if you need that donor contact info, making sure that those who are raising money for you, maybe if they're doing it via email, and we don't necessarily have that site set up, we're using a more simple way of bringing in funds that we're able to get that information so we can thank that donor properly as well. So really, as we're thinking about this, we're really just thinking, and I hope you take something from today, we don't have to do everything here, but just thinking too about the time you'll need to be able to set this up, because you'll want to have these ready to go, these different templates ready for the peers before and after, and then also for your advocates as you're thinking about that. So just taking a little bit of time, maybe it's you, maybe it's a board member, maybe it's a team effort to create these templates so that you have them ready to go. So once the campaign kicks off or the events, or as you're prepping for that event, you're able to really focus on building those relationships. And then ultimately, as we're following up, what we always recommend here, you'll have heard of this multiple times if you've heard or attended any of our thank you or stewardship related webinars. Really important to thank folks 3 times. You're thanking them right away, 2 to 4 weeks later, and then 8 to 12 weeks later. And this is really just, focused on, we appreciate this gift. We're letting them know we received it. Now we're sharing a little bit about thanks and look how we did overall. Because of you, we were successful. And then finally, that last one was a lot of thanks and see what we're doing now as a result of that. And here's where we're going in the future. So we're thanking them in 3 kind of different ways with different intentions as we move forward. Again, our goal is to acquire these donors, to have them be a part of our group that, yes, we have those lead advocates, but they're introducing us to other folks and we're able to build that trust in our own relationships with those people. And then finally, as we get through this, I'm going to go ahead and just share a couple different tips. And these are pieces that you could certainly pass on to your teams as they think about peer-to-peer solicitation, so the actual ask, and as you think about prepping folks for that ask. So first here, we have our donor identities. And our donor identities, this is really, as we think about how people can think about their networks, this kind of builds on that. So as people are thinking about their own networks, there's a lot of reasons that people give. There are people who give because they want to know they're doing something good. Maybe they're motivated to be the donor type. They want to drive systems change, social change, lasting legacy. They want to fight back against something that they feel is unjust. They're giving due to a personal connection to an issue or community, or they're supporting you as part of their civic and engaged identity. So as you're thinking about this, and people are thinking of their networks, you're also thinking about the folks not only who are engaged in your organization, who are volunteering, who have these networks, but how do the donor identities come into play with that? How do they see themselves? How do you see that they see themselves? And how can we leverage this in the asks that folks are making? As we'll do this is again something that you can, a slide that you could pass on or pass on to a teammate who is drafting the pitches or the sample language, or you could share this with your network of advocates who are going to be out there peer fundraising, but different ways to be thinking about pitch. And I won't get totally into this, but as we think about our pitches, as we think about what's successful or what success can really look like, it's really including elements of game plan, information, vision, and emotion. So any really strong pitch is able to, we know just generally, we all relate to one of these, and the kind of acronym here is GIVE, which works out very nicely. But one of, in each of these, for our own selves, one of these probably relates most strongly, where it motivates us really strongly. So we might be game plan people, we might be emotion people, might be vision, information people, but ultimately we're reaching a broad network. So how do we include an element of each of these in our pitch that we're crafting for folks? So as we think about game plan is thinking about logistics, making it clear how we're going to do the work. Information is really those facts and stats, making it clear what our impact is and how we measure it. Vision is that purpose, that mission, that long-term focus, making it clear why we're doing this work. And then emotion is a personal appeal. So making sure and really clear how people are impacted and their stories that we're telling. So as we think about this, as we're building those pitches for people, thinking about how can we have maybe two variations of the pitch. One maybe that we know really works for our network is the game plan, because people love how we're doing the work. Or we know that our organization has an ability to make that more of that emotional appeal. And so we're creating a version of our pitch for our advocates to pass on that really is focused around emotion. So this is just a tip. You can take this, pass it on if they're creating their own pitch, or pass it on to a teammate if they're creating it, or for yourself, save this one, bookmark it, come back to it as we talk about pitch. Another thing here, and you all know this, is development folks or folks related to the development. Language really matters. So included here, again, another reference slide, persuasive words that we could use as we prep our pitch. Words such as you, which gives the audience, or an audience member's name, really helps to make it more personal. Because this really implies that you have a solid reason for asking. We're asking this because of this. Join is a really active invitation. Join us in supporting XYZ. So this turns a solicitation into an invitation. You want them. And then as we think about this instantly, promising something then and there, it's too good to pass up. Instantly your donation will make an impact. Using words that convey kind of urgency as appropriate, that can show that the change will be immediate, that the organization will receive those funds immediately. Sharing that in your pitch using these words can really turn what would be a little bit more passive into like that active ask that we are having people use. And then finally, the last slide here, as we're thinking about this, what we're trying to do here is that transference of trust. We're exposing ourselves to new networks. We're thinking about how do we expose ourselves to those new networks, and how do we bring them into the fold of our organization so that we're able to build those relationships that we know can be really important. And when we think about this, gaining trust really requires that authentic and transparent communication. So as we are thinking about this, we'll want to be transparent about costs and overhead. As we're thinking about how we note that money is brought into our organization, sharing about what that might be, sharing where that money is going, that people are raising money on behalf of. We're thinking about donor identities, and we're thinking about impact, right? By supporting, they're doing something good. This is how our organization is going to use it. Here's the impact and the vision that we are working towards. Here are the values our organization has, and here's our mission. By supporting us, you're supporting those values. You're supporting that mission. You'll want to also think about that language again, that shared language amongst donors and constituents. If there's a certain way that you want to be talking and that you feel is really important to be talking about those that you work with, those that you impact, using that shared language as a way of gaining trust and showing that you are understanding of the community and you and that you want them to also use that language. And then finally, as we think about gaining trust, storytelling is the most effective way of fundraising. So as we're thinking about storytelling, really thinking about the most ethical ways of sharing what other client stories can look like in testimonials and impact. And what this really comes down to is telling client stories from their first interaction with your organization and telling them in that person-first narrative. It's really important that we're sharing, what has happened at our organization from our understanding, not that before, not that total after, but just what have we seen them do in our organization. We're also thinking about it. What are we able to share? Are we getting consent from the folks that we're sharing their stories? And are we really thinking too about making sure that we're telling the story as it is, not us adding flourishing details and extrapolating on it. We're really just telling it as it is. So making sure that as we're gaining trust with new supporters, that we're focusing on what has happened. And this is the honest story. This is the story that we have. And that will tell the impact of our organization because we have such strong missions and programs and impact. So that was a lot. I see a couple questions here in the chat. I'm going to end here with some next steps, and then I will go ahead and answer any questions I see here in the chat. But as we think about next steps here, I'll leave you with a 6-part to-do list. And again, this is there's a lot I covered today. If you haven't done a peer-to-peer campaign, you may just want to start thinking about, do you have those advocates? And if you don't have those advocates, taking time to identify, that list of supporters who could be peer leaders at your organization. So that could be the first place to start if you're thinking about this. Another thing is, if you are running a peer-to-peer, just asking them early to participate in the campaign. Once you've identified those folks, making sure that you have enough time to prep your own internal materials, your team for this, but also making sure that your supporters have those 2 to 4 weeks to prep their own campaigns, edit those templates, get ready. As you think about those templates, again, giving those leaders a toolkit with everything they need, including timing and language. If you are prepping for this, maybe you already have that list. Maybe this year your goal is to make sure that you have those templates for when you're ready to do the campaign in the next 6 months. Ultimately, you want to thank your donors and make sure that you're thanking your advocates and the people that they brought into your organization. So you want to keep showing gratitude for leaders before, during, and after that campaign and planning accordingly. And then finally, if you're doing all of this already, great for you. That's amazing that you are doing this and thinking about this, but maybe you're not bringing in the results you had hoped. You could be thinking about how to expand how people are thinking about their networks, but also another way of thinking about this is gamifying. So are there prizes or matching gifts to drive that donor behavior? Something that you feel that would lead them to being able to drive their networks towards giving to your organization. All right. I will pause here to see if there are any questions. I know some questions are coming in the chat. I also see, will this slide deck be available? Yes, we will be sharing out the slides as well as the recording and any relevant resources next week when we send out the post-summit follow-up. Yeah, I'm seeing a question that came in a little bit earlier is, what platform do you suggest for small nonprofits that don't have their own fundraising platform? So probably the easiest way you could do this, though certainly can have its cons as well, because it's not tied to that specific campaign. But if you're thinking about doing this without a fundraising platform, you could use however your organization collects donations virtually, whether that's a donation button on your site that's tied to bank account or PayPal or however that works for your organization. You could drive people towards that link. So maybe you're running an email campaign and people are donating that way. Maybe you're having individuals posting about it. You may not be able to track exactly what's coming in through them, but it's going right back to your page, and it's really more of an awareness campaign. So if you're thinking about this and you don't have that platform, you may choose to go ahead and use that. If you don't have your own fundraising platform, there are a lot of platforms out there that don't have to be integrated kind of year-round with your site. You could be using them just for this campaign. An example of this is CauseVox. We've used them for Giving Tuesday, but that's not our primary way that we bring in donations to Spur Local. We have that button on our website. People can make donations to us directly, but on Giving Tuesday, they can make them via CauseVox, where we are able to set up these peer-to-peer campaigns. Similarly, in the past, we've used Neon One. That's another campaign software that you could use specific to that campaign, but may not be something that you're using year round as a donation platform. Yeah, and is there a quick summary of these points so we can introduce the idea of peer-to-peer fundraising to an organization that isn't familiar with it? Yes, so what we can do, and we'll make a note, is we have a 30-minute webinar on peer-to-peer fundraising. It's not as in-depth as today's presentation for the summit here, but we're happy to share that out. That might be a good primer for you to share with the organization. It really touches on what is peer-to-peer fundraising and how to do that. And then we, of course, have a lot of templates and tools that we're happy to share, but if you're looking for kind of a primer on that, something that we can share in the follow-up, in addition to this lead advocates worksheet, which Sarah put in the chat and we shared on screen, we can also share that 30-minute webinar so that you have a shorter version, absolutely. And we'll also share the slide deck if you want to go ahead and cut that and kind of share it with folks as well. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions coming through here. We have our final session of the panel, or sorry, it's final session of the summit at 3 o'clock, and that is our panel conversation. So Sarah will put this in the chat, but if you miss it and you're relying on your workbook all day, that's music to my ears, but just go ahead and head over back to Matt's Zoom. We will be having a panel discussion at 3 o'clock, and it's our last session of today. And with that, thanks all for being here. This has been great. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to follow up, and I appreciate you being here. Great, and Sarah just put the Zoom link in the chat, so feel free to go ahead and head over there. We'll keep this Zoom room open for just another minute or so, and then we ourselves will go ahead and head over to the panel on Matt's Zoom.